Hi, class. Let's start chapter 1, microeconomic. Okay, so the book is called The Principle of Microeconomic by Sayer and Morris, the ninth edition. That's the book we're going to utilize for this course. It's published on McGraw-Hill's if you want to go and have as a soft copy of it. And basically, let's start with the chapter 1. In this chapter, what we're going to learn is describe why economics is a very relevant. Why do we need economics and why is it very relevant? Define economics and make a decision between macroeconomics and microeconomics. Demonstrate the scarcities, which is the limit to resources, the choice and the opportunity cost are at the heart of economics, and making efficiencies cornerstone of the discipline. We're also going to learn about explaining why trade results in economics being more productive. Why do we need a trade? Explain the three fundamental questions and explain the four ways of economics can be categorized. And we will use the production possibility model to illustrate choice, opportunity costs, efficiencies, and unemployment. So now the relevance of economics, the controversies that we always involve in it, knowing that economic growth is just the countries are growing, there is economic growth in it or not, income redistributions, road pricing, and globalization. What is economics? Well, there is two part of how we put the statement. Is the positive statement, facts that can be verified with the empirical data. It means that um, 9 o'clock in the morning, so there is a sun shine or the daytime. That's very positive. They call it positive statement. When it's the data is very clear associated with the result. Normative statement is based on a person belief or a value system and cannot be verified with the data. So if we say the person became rich, the question comes in here, how rich he got compared to what? When you say the student uh, was passed the course as a number 10, the highest 10 people. Now, if he's on a 10, number 10, what's the number 9 got? Did he get 61% or did he get 99%? So there is, it's depend on, cannot verified with the data. So that's what we mean by normative statement is has a point of view. You get a data and you derive your point of view from it. Now, as example, to make it more clear, is when we say the federal government budget this year is the largest in history, this is a positive because a budget, a number, a dollars that you can count on them, count them. Now, when you say the national debt is at the manageable level and therefore is nothing to worry about it, here where you is based on your point of view. So the national debt could be rising, but you're not worried about it because it's under control, or because it's declining and you're not worried about it and it's under control. So it's a normative, is depend on the value that you see and believe. When you say the price of gasoline is higher than it need to be, is a normative. For a poor person, probably this high, it's very high. For very rich, is a normative. And the rising Canadian export are creating many new jobs in the countries. That's probably a positive because it's numbers supported by data. But what is economics? Economics made of economics theories and it's driven with that. Now, look at how positive statements are related. Now, use the scientific method. When you do an economic theory, you use a scientific method. Any theory that you're building, you need a scientific method for it. Now, to do a scientific method, and probably some of you took it in the marketing research, is first you set up the hypothesis. Say X will result in Y. Now, this is a hypothesis. Then you define the term and a state of assumption. Is you say X will result if Y if other things is not changing. Or, yeah, if other things is a stable, something like that, just to keep it simple. Then you really gather the data. So when you gather the data and suddenly you find when it's so X is resulted does not result in Y, for example, but 2X will result in Y. So here is you gather the data to the hypothesis, which is then you adjust your hypothesis back and you say 2X will result in Y. And then you take this process again, define the term, and you say, assuming everything, no Z there, no F there, no Y, no B there, and this is where you do the assumption. So 2x will result in y. And then you gather the data again, and then it's approved, and then you accept it. Otherwise, if it's showing, keep changing again and again, then one day it becomes 4x's cause y, and one day become 1x cause y, then you will reject this, the hypothesis. But once for a stable and valid, always 2x becomes a y, then it becomes a proved or a positive hypothesis, which is it turns to be a theory. And the economic theories is also driven from this scientific approach. Now, we have two type of economics. One is macro and micro. In a macro, how the major component of an economy interact, like unemployment, inflation, interest rate. I assume you have taken the macro class with me or somebody else, and it's basically is all in whole picture in a way. In a micro, which is our focus in this course, is the outcomes of a decision by people and firms. Keep in mind, you might, every firm, how it's operates is different than how the whole economy is operating. One person might be operating different than the whole society out there. So it's also the microeconomics is based on supply and demand, based on the cost of the production and market structures. Let me give you a good examples is if you're looking at, for example, at a price. In a macro level, you go the average of all products, which is price parities or PPP. In a micro level, you average, you say of a particular product, like the gas, the oil, the price of banana, something like that. In a production, we look at the whole economy, the production of the whole economy. In the micro, we look at a particular firm or industry. We're not looking at the whole thing, the industry like telecommunication industries or Apple or Microsoft, a particular entity. Then we talk about income. In macro, we talk about total national income like the GDP and GMP. Here we're talking about certain profession or factor of incomes. In the employment, we talk about, in macro, we talk overall national employment. Here, we once again, we look at by firm, industry, or occupation, doctors, or lawyers, or teachers. Taxes, once again, we look at the whole government tax system and the total taxes here for the individual or a firm. So there is a whole picture, which is a macro level. And then this big picture is made up by smaller pictures gathered together. And this is where we do the micro level, the smaller pictures, basically. Now, let's test what our understanding. Identify which of the following topic will likely be in a microeconomics course and which in the macro course. The price of iPods, for example, will be in the micro because we're talking about a product here. The unemployment rate, once again, it will be a macro because we're talking about the whole country, for example. The presence of monopolies is a micro because it's a certain part, it's not the whole country in a monopoly, is some sectors or industries. The rate of a growth, economic growth, once again, is a macro. It's pretty clear. So these are the differences. You need to evaluate them and see which one is macro and which one at the micro level. Now, when we do any economy, we have any economy approach, we do one important, crucial issue is resources are scarce. Resources are limited. Resources are not available as much as we want. You have a $10, you cannot buy something worth of $50 because your resources, your money is limited. Resources or a factor of production or input are anything used to produce a good and services. So if you want to produce something, you need the resources. And these resources could be limited, so you cannot produce as much as you want as according to your resources. Now, do not have enough resources to produce everything everybody wants. So there is a limited. So if you want to focus on building schools, your resources gone on focusing on building schools, you cannot have a, for example, very strong defense system. Must have some way to retain scarce of resources that you need to keep these scarce of resources once depleted, you probably will not get it again. Now, the resources itself is four parts. Do not make a mistake between capital and money or enterprise and companies. Enterprise, in other words, is the entrepreneurs. So the four type of resources, first is the labor, which is a human, mental, and physical efforts. Secondly is the land, any natural resources used to produce a good or service. So oil is part of the land. Housing is a part of the land. Then capital is, it could be tool, equipment, factories, and building used in the production process. So they are in a production process. Here, the land is any natural resources used to produce a good or service. Capitals are tools who help you to produce this. And the enterprise is the human resources that innovates and takes the risk and comes, as we say, the business people, the entrepreneurs is the best word for it. Now, when these uh, resources, how do they get paid? And once you know the pay resources and how they get paid, it's easy to distinguish between them. Anything that gets wages, salaries, is called a labor. Anything that gets paid through a rent is called land. Like a house is considered to be land in economics. So because you pay the rent for a landlord, and that's called a landlord. Anything that collects interest from it is is called capital. So the money, because it's collect interest, is a capital. Um, your equipment will collect interest because of the capital, or pay interest because you took these things. And anything that makes a profit is called enterprise. Like entrepreneurs make profit, business people they make profit, organization, big organization itself, it makes profit. So these are called profit. So we have four resources: labor, land, capital, enterprise, and each one earns differently. So labor will earn wages, land will earn rent, capital will earn interest, and enterprise will earn profits. Now, just to test your understanding again, for example, if we're looking at a barcode scanner in the supermarket, what is this? Is called capital, because you utilize them to do business, okay? A processing of the business. You have a fresh drink water is called land, because you are taking its resources. Then you have the copper deposit in mine is also land because resources. The work of a system analysis is a labor. The first application of e-technology to an economics textbook. This is an enterprise because it's making money. And an office building is called capital because collecting rents. So the technology and the opportunity is basically, let me say one thing here. When you talk about technology, it doesn't mean here is in IT in terms of economics. It means a method of production, the technology of how to produce. Is it mechanics? It is hand, labor force, focus, or automation. This is the method of, so it's a method of production, a way in which the resources are combined to produce goods and services. And then when you talk about the opportunity cost, now let's say I want to buy a sandwich. I have $10, and I have an option of buying a sandwich or getting on the bus, go to home and eat. So I decide to get on the bus. What's my opportunity cost is eating the sandwich. Now, if I decided to eat the sandwich, what's my opportunity cost is that I go to home. So I'm sacrificing something for something based on the choice. So the value of the next best alternative that is given up as a result of making a particular choice. So the scarcity, because you have a limited, because you have $10, and whether you buy a sandwich or you get on the bus, this is force you to make a choice. And my choice was getting to the bus, and the opportunity cost is involving, which is involved with cost, opportunity cost. Now, the consumer goods and services, a product used by consumer to satisfy the wants and and needs. So if I'm hungry, I buy a sandwich. So this is a product that I bought as a consumer and satisfy my hunger. On the other hand, the capital good is factory tools, equipment used to make the good for sales. So in the early of this class, we distinguish is the tools that you are utilizing to produce the final goods is the capital goods. But if you buying or getting something and you're using it, that becomes a consumer good. Now let me give you a good example. You buy a hammer, and if this hammer is used in your home to fix things, becomes a consumer good. But if this hammer, you took it for your work and you worked outside, becomes what? A capital good because it's producing money for you. So making more capital good increase a growth, but there is an opportunity cost in terms of consumer goods. Now, decide whether each of the following is a consumer goods, capital goods, or both. As we said, the jackhammer could be capital goods because you all use the jackhammers for outside, you don't use it for your home. Carton of cigarette definitely will be a consumer good because you're buying it and you smoke it. Why do we trying to differentiate between these? Because some of the decision making, where should we put our taxes, sometimes it influence what kind of product we are talking about. So a jackhammer, a capital good, um, so puts lots of taxes on it, for example, then people will buy less jackhammers, so the production will be less in that sense. But when it comes to the smoke, usually the politician puts lots of taxes on it because it's a consumer good, first of all, and second, it's called inferior good. So uh, and inelastic. We'll talk about it later on about that. A toothbrush is definitely a consumer good because you use it for yourself. A hammer is both. We brought that example earlier. And a farmer tractor is capital good because you're using it to, to grow things in the farm. Now, productive efficiencies. Production of an product at the lowest possible average cost. So you have a fixed cost, we cannot do anything, but how we become efficient is when we try to minimize our uh, average cost by lowering variable costs, for example, as much as possible, and producing a lot, so it becomes an average cost is very limited. And when we talk about average cost, number of produced unit divided by variable cost plus total variable cost plus total fixed cost divided by number of value units, and that's what you get the average cost. Now, allocative efficiencies, production of that combination of output that be satisfied consumer demand. We will be talking more about allocative efficiencies end of this chapter. So why we do a trade? One of the reason is we do the allocative efficiencies. Say I'm good in cutting the trees, and my neighbor is good in sewing clothes. Now, if I need a clothes and my neighbor needs woods to keep warm, because both of us can be specialized in certain things, I can cut more trees and he can sew faster. But if we decide not to do any trade, I probably need to cut trees, but I would spend more time, sometimes, on sewing clothes. And since I'm not efficient, I'm not good in sewing clothes, it might take so much time from me, which is minimizing or lowering the number of cutting trees. On the reverse side, my neighbor might be not good, definitely is not good in cutting trees, but he needs to stay warm, so he has to go out and cut trees. And once he cut trees, it takes him much longer than what I do. And that will affect his timing of doing clothing, sewing clothes. So if the trade happen, both of us are good in certain things, so we can trade them because we're both of us can produce certain stuff. And this is applicable on a micro level and is applicable on a macro level. A trade is a voluntary trade benefit the both parties. The more trade, the greater is the benefit, and definitely applies to individual as well as a nation. Three fundamental questions. What should we produce? What to produce? In my case, I will cut trees and my neighbor will be sewing clothes because we're good at it. How to produce is using the technology. Is how we do that with the method. Is this handy? Do we have a chainsaw? Do I have a chainsaw? It's the method that I'm going to use. And to whom? In my case, as to my neighbor, and my neighbor will sewing some clothes to me. So all economic societies um, must answer these questions: what to produce, how to produce the technology that's going to, and to whom they need to produce. Now, there is four type of economics in general. There is what you call a cooperation. There's what you call a custom. Cooperation, command, custom, and competition. Mother countries are all usually a combination of all above. Cooperation in old days, because there is no scarce of resource, everybody goes and hunt together and everybody eats. And there is a cooperation on together. They don't save food, they work together. There is also you find that in small villages, in where everybody cooks and everybody eats, everybody utilizes, and it's at some level you would see it in some kind of Canadian societies like Harrow right there. They have one kitchen and everybody goes and females goes and cook there, and male comes and eat. We still have this kind of societies around in Canada. So that's what you call a cooperation. Then you have the command, which is one person is making all the orders. And the old days you had the Pharaoh style, the Roman, which is the godfather of the Pharaoh command everybody, and he had so many slaves to work on it. And then you have the custom, which is, it's mostly you will find it in a religious and probably in non-religious also, but it's a custom. Like, it is done through the beliefs, certain beliefs. You do things in that society in a certain way. Or it could be, non-religious is like, for example, we can bring a very good example. We send young people to school for free, kids, but we don't feed them for free. So this is kind of a custom of the worldwide, or in Canada, for example. And then you have the competition, is everybody competing with each other over the resources and over the productions. So these are the four kinds, but usually the mother countries are usually a combination of four above. Now, production possibility models. Production possibility models, a graphical representative of a various combination of maximum output that can be produced from the available resource and technology. I will explain it more in the next slide. There is a full assumption, full employment. These are the assumptions. There's a full employment, best of the technology available, and productivity efficiencies. We bring back the same example, cutting the trees. Now, if I can cut, if I'm focusing on only cutting the trees, I can cut 10 trees a day and sew clothes zero. But if I decide to sew one shirt a day, then I might be not able to cut 10 trees. I can, because my maximum is 10 trees, and I'm using the chainsaw, best technologies. Now, if I'm sewing one shirt today, so then I would probably cut 8 trees. When I decide to sew 2 shirts a day, because it takes longer time, whether I do one then two, that it doesn't take it twice a time because I'm not that professional. It takes more time for me. Then I can only cut 6 or 7 trees. So the numbers is reduced because I'm at a full employment. I'm doing 10, but once I nothing t-shirt, but when I do one shirt, there is numbers of the trees goes down, and it's until, you know, the product efficiencies. The way you look at it is this way, is let's say I can, or a country X can produce 195 tons of wheat, okay, and 150 cars. Now, if they decide to produce only wheat, they will be producing at the point A, which is 100,000 wheat and 0 cars. And if they decide to produce only car, they will be producing 150 cars and 0 wheat, as you see. But let's assume they started at 100 wheat, they will be producing 0 cars. But if they decided to produce suddenly 50 cars, then uh, uh, they have no choice but to reduce the number of production of wheat because they are assuming at the full employment. But if they decided to produce 100 wheat and 150 cars is not attainable because point of the curve represent the maximum output possible available in the resource. So in this case, they produce 100 wheat and 0 car. Here they produce 95 and 50. And this is non-attainable because they cannot produce that. And at this point, they can produce 150, 120 cars and 65 wheat. So there is a maximum curve that they can utilize. Now, the production possibility models is driven from the scarcities, represent the point of outside curve is outside, unattainable. We'll explain later on how you can attain it. The choice represent between the point of the curves, where we said 50 cars and 60 tons of wheat. It's a choice, a combination. You're 100 wheat, 0 car. This is a choice. So represent by point of the curve, which is efficient, and a point within the curve. If you are inside the curve, this is attainable but inefficient. Here, unattainable. You cannot reach it unless you have some kind of um, technology improvement. So we said scarcities is represented by a point outside the curve. We said the choice represented by point on the curve efficient and point within the curve inefficient. And then we can opportunity cost, we spoke about it, but represent by the downward slope of the curve. So the opportunity cost here, if I'm decided to produce 50 of cars, my opportunity cost is becomes 5 tons of wheat because my wheat reduced from 100 to 95. Now, the law of increasing costs. The factors of production are not equally suitable. As output increase, the per unit cost additional increases, giving the production possibility curve, it's bowed out the shape. So why do we have such shape? Is because, first of all, as we said in example, when I'm making cutting 10 trees, I'm at the top point. But when I decide to make one t-shirt, sewing one t-shirt, it doesn't mean I'm gonna make 9 trees. No, I'll probably lose the time of cutting 2 trees. So this is why the shape, and then when I decided to make two t-shirts, it doesn't mean I'm losing only cutting 2 trees. It's not a horizontal. I'm probably losing, in this case, instead of 2 by 2, which is 4, no, 2 by 3. So the cost is getting higher. And you read sometimes in, there is a variable cost and there's a fixed cost, and the variable cost might goes higher after certain production, but it goes lower. But here is because of allocation. This is what makes the shape differently. So the factor of production are not equally suitable. And here, because we said that if I'm not good in making the t-shirts, so it's going to take me more time to do that. The output increased, the per unit cost of additional units increases, give the production possibility curve about out shape like this. So this is what's happening here, is has to be that way, because I'm probably so good in producing wheat, but I'm not good in, takes me longer time and more resources to produce cars. And I'm sacrificing 5% of the wheat to make it 50 cars, which is here is indicate that actually I'm good at making cars than producing wheat maybe, or vice versa. Now, the law of increasing cost, the factor of, we said, we spoke about it. Now, the law of increasing opportunity cost. Now, as more cars are produced, an increasing amount of wheat must be given up. So this is why you will see the curve happening here. So because when you decide to give up, um, let's say, 10 million tons of wheat to produce 40 more cars. Here, you're giving up 20 million tons more. See, now you're not giving up 10 more. No, because you're increasing only 10 here, but you're doubling up, and here is 25. So the numbers of decreasing is depend on how efficient and effective using these resources. Now, um, these are, you can look at it as numbers where you can reduce moving from one point to another and how it's done. Okay. Now, I just wanted to show you how this economic growth happening. Economic growth happening is by improving the technology. And when we talk about technology, once again, we're not talking about IT. It's the way things we do. If we can do it better, more efficient, that's where the growth happens. Let's assume in the beginning, I was not able to cut 10 trees, but once I learned how to use the chainsaw, start practicing, I was able to do two. And with the time, I was able suddenly, my experience gave me the opportunity to cut 10 trees. So the technology, the know-how increase, the utilizing the chainsaw much better, easier, better corner cutting it is all affecting the growth. So with a technology improvement, you might have this shift that you can see here, increasing the quality of wheat per period and quantity of the cars. And then you will see we can produce it instead of 100, because we proved the quality, we started producing 120. And here, because we moved into technology more and more, we start producing 180. But this shift does not happen in parallel always. You might have an improvement, for example, here only in car. So you will end up, and nothing in wheat, you end up with this kind of improvement. So um, improvement in the technology shift the curve to P2 can now produce more of either good. So suddenly after a while, I became much better in sewing the t-shirt. So instead of sewing one shirt at 1 hour, I can sew two, for example. So I improved my technology in sewing the t-shirt, but I haven't improved my technology in cutting more trees yet. Sometimes um, it's I can do the both. I can get better in making the trees and I cutting the trees and get better in doing the sewing the t-shirts. So here where we see a shift, a total shift. But in the case of this, no, I suddenly got better in sewing, for example, but I'm haven't got better yet in cutting the trees. Hopefully in the future, I will learn more how to cut the trees. So the summary, the key concept to remember is economics is a relevant discipline in our society because we need to economics to understand why this happened, not what. We don't need to know what is easier, but why this happened, how we can do that. These two questions, we need to answer them in of the business thing in a business. So we need to understand the economics theories and utilizing the economic theory. The scientific method is used economics, which is divided into, we spoke about the micro and the macro. We talked about the scarcities, the choice, and the opportunities, costs that are heart of the economy. We talked about selections, and we talked about between choosing a hamburger, buying a $10 hamburger, or getting the bus. We talked about the greater trade result in economics. So we brought an example of cutting 10 trees, or and my neighbor is sewing 5 t-shirts a day. To understand what to produce, how to produce it, and who to receive is our a fundamental economics question. And we will be talking more about them in the details. Economic society may be organized through, we said, cooperation, command, custom, or and competition, or mostly now, as we said, mix of that. The production possibility model, we showed it. And that's it. End of the chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay. Bye bye.